You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV TriState.
Broke the story on local homestead tax credit fiasco. Expose the Evansville Redevelopment Commission excessive spending habits.
Your community watchdog. CityCountyObserver.com is your online community newspaper dedicated to the progress of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. We're a nonpartisan publication providing insight into political issues and events that shape our community. We are a watchdog for you, the citizen. Check us out online, city-countyobserver.com. That's city-countyobserver.com.
TriState Voices, an open discussion with area leaders on issues affecting communities throughout the Tri-State. Now, here's your host, Mike Woods.
Good morning. Welcome to TriState Voices. TriState Voices is jointly sponsored by the City County Observer, WTSN, and Woods & Woods. Every week we interview a different community leader concerning issues that are important to all of us. Today we're honored to have Nick Herman, the Vanderburgh County Prosecutor. Mr. Herman's been the Vanderburgh County Prosecutor for 4 years, and he's getting ready to seek re-election. Nick, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You know, I worked at the prosecutor's office actually 3 different times in my life. Once when I was going through college, and then twice after I got out of law school. And the office now is so much different than I worked there over 20 years ago. It's huge. Why don't you just explain to people all the different things your office does, how many people work there, and what all you do?
Sure. We have actually 65 full-time employees in our office. We have about 75 people that work out of our office. We have a couple of Evansville police detectives that work out of our office. And we also have Adult Protective Services, which is housed in our office space as well. As an office, the prosecutor's office is responsible for prosecuting all criminal cases in Vanderburgh County. So we prosecute felony cases, misdemeanor, and infractions. So anything from a speeding ticket to a murder case, that's what we're responsible for. We represent the citizens of the state of Indiana in those proceedings. Aside from that, another big job that we do is we have about 23 people that are responsible for enforcing child support. We bring in close to $20 million in child support payments every year through our office. Payments are made through the clerk's office. Our job is to enforce the orders and to make sure that those payments are being made.
You know, that money that you recover from child support, as I understand, some of that goes back to the government to reimburse for welfare costs to people who have the children. Is that right?
Obviously, if somebody gets divorced or has a child out of wedlock and someone's not on assistance, that money goes directly to the parent that's taking care of the child. But if the custodial parent is on some type of state assistance, then it is a reimbursement to the state. The state actually does seek to collect that and to reimburse the state for any TANF or any type of program that they provide.
20 million, that's a lot. Is that growing a lot, or?
It's had kind of some ups and downs in the last couple of years. Up to, I think it was about a year ago, we collected child support up to the age of 21, and that's been backed off to 19 by the state. So you had a little bit. We've been consistently right under about $20 million for the last few years.
So is that by wage garnishments or the season income tax refunds, or how do you go about that?
We use about any means that we can. Wage garnishments work, obviously, if someone's employed and gets paid by a paycheck. If we can find out who that employer is, we can get it set up so it comes out of their check just like taxes would or anything else. We obviously tax returns. We seize a lot of tax returns. If we find out that someone has the lottery's been a big help. If someone wins a lottery award, they check to see if there's any outstanding child support.
Good news and bad news, huh?
Yeah, good news and bad news. But there are different means. I mean, we have some administrative things that we can do. We can suspend a driver's license or make it so you can't sell your car, those types of things. And then obviously on the penalty side, if a court finds you in contempt, they can put you in jail. So typically they'll bring you in, talk to you about your income, whether or not you can pay, those types of things. And then as things progress, if you refuse to pay and have the ability to do so, then the judge could theoretically put you in jail.
Okay. Now, you mentioned felonies and misdemeanors. Why don't you explain to our viewers what is the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor? Sure.
The difference in the state of Indiana is whether or not you face more than a year in jail. So felonies, right now we have a system, it goes murder and then it goes from A to D felony. On a D felony you face 6 months to 3 years in jail. All misdemeanors you face less than 1 year. A misdemeanor is up to 1 year and then they go down A, B, and C. So you have, we have about 6,500 misdemeanors a year right now. We had just under 3,000 felonies last year.
Okay, now there's been a change in the way that the legislature is going to handle felonies and misdemeanors, is that correct?
Beginning July 1st of this year, we're going to go away from the class system of A through D, and we're going to go to a numerical system from 1 to 6. So they basically split up A felonies into level 1 and level 2, B felonies into level 3 and level 4, and then C felonies are level 5s and D felonies are level 6s.
Okay, are there any crimes that used to be a misdemeanor and is now a felony, or was a felony and is now a misdemeanor?
The majority of crimes that changed went down. A lot of the lower level D felonies are now going to be misdemeanors. I'm not aware of any that necessarily went up. That's hard to say because there's a lot of changes that are happening. Right now, people are serving less than 50% of their time in jail once you're sentenced. Beginning July 1st, you're going to have to serve 75%. Now, at the same time, they've lowered the penalty ranges, but if you're going to, if we can tell a victim's family or we can tell a defendant you are going to serve 75% of this, that gives you a more certain sentence. I'm a big proponent of truth in sentencing. I think if somebody tells you that you're going to serve 50 days or 1 year in jail, that you should serve 50 days or 1 year in jail, as opposed to the system that we have now where you may get 3 years and only serve 6 or 8 months. I think the closer we can get to truth in sentencing, the better for everyone.
Okay. Well, when you get a case comes into your office, how do you decide what to file? I mean, obviously there's a huge difference between a felony and a misdemeanor upon somebody's ability to get a job, carry a firearm, all the rest of that. So how do you determine what you're going to file on somebody?
Well, we get our cases from whatever law enforcement agency was the first responder. So maybe it's the police department, the sheriff's department, the Indiana State Police. Sometimes we get them from conservation officers, those types of things. They prepare a report and they send it to us, and they typically have some type of proposed charge, what they were investigating, and they'll list out what they think it is. Then we have a screening department that looks at each case, and they look at several different factors. One is, what are the facts of the case? And factually, what does that fit under? For example, if somebody takes something from a store, that's theft, or it could be misdemeanor conversion. They're basically the same crime. Somebody takes something not authorized to do so and gets past the point of sale. So we figure out which crime, which statute they violate, and then we start to evaluate where we go from there. So in an example of a theft case, we're going to look at what's the value of what they took. Do they have prior convictions? Have they done this before? And also, what was their demeanor? You know, if you're stealing from a store in Vanderburgh County and you fight with the loss prevention agent, we're going to file a felony, period. If you have a prior conviction, there's a strong likelihood we're going to file a felony. But if it's something that's minor, something that is not part of your character, we'll take a look at that, and we may file a misdemeanor in that case. So there is some discretion with some crimes as to what we file and what we don't.
I guess you look at mitigating circumstances.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then if the police want a felony filed, but you look at it and you think a misdemeanor would be more appropriate, do you kind of defer to them, or you do what you think, or whose job is that?
Ultimately, it's our job to decide what charges, if any, are filed. We try to communicate. Sometimes things don't make it in reports. You know, these are things written at the end of people's shifts. So before we will seriously reduce something, we make every effort to reach out to law enforcement and find out what their opinion is, those types of things, as to whether or not it should be lowered. But at the end of the day, it is our decision, and so we try to make contact with everybody involved before we make a major change.
Okay. Now, you don't have to take a case, felony, for example, through a grand jury, do you?
No, we don't.
But sometimes you do. Well, when do you decide when to take it to a grand jury and when not to?
In the overwhelming majority of cases, we just get it and we file charges. We're not required, like some other states, to go to a grand jury. We take things to a grand jury whenever we think that there may be a question within the community as to what charge may be appropriate. A grand jury is when you sit down and you lay your evidence out in front of people. It's a lot like picking a jury. You get your 6 people in and you lay out what your evidence is, you call your witnesses, those types of things, and you let them evaluate. Now, the standard for filing is different than the standard for finding somebody guilty at a trial. At trial, we have to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. for charging information, you're looking more by a preponderance of the evidence type standard, where it's a little bit less, but you still want to. One of the questions we always ask is, what do you think we can make at a trial? I mean, obviously, when you're making a charging decision, it's early on in the game, and there's always going to be additional evidence found. There's always going to be additional investigation done, but you still you have a duty to only file charges that you can make.
Well, I know recently you had the Ira Beamer case, and of course that was a really controversial case, and I know it's one that troubled you a lot. It was hard, it was just really unusual facts, but you took that to a grand jury, didn't you? Why'd you take that to a grand jury?
Well, that was an interesting case. Legally, it wasn't particularly difficult. In the state of Indiana, you can use deadly force. If someone comes into your home, we have what's commonly referred to as castle doctrine. You're able to assume that they're there to cause bodily injury to somebody, serious bodily injury, and you're allowed to use deadly force. For self-defense purposes, you're allowed to respond with like force. So if someone's hitting you, you may not be able to respond with deadly force, but if you get to a point where you feel that deadly force is being used against you, then you can. And then the only other time that you can use deadly force under our laws is if you're interjecting to protect a third party. So if deadly force being used against a third party, you can intervene and use deadly force. So those are, Indiana clearly defines where you can and can't use deadly force. And this is a case where, an unfortunate case where someone got burglarized, robbed, there's people showed up, they hit him, they stole some things, and then they left. And they left and they were down the road. And then the individual pursued them, and ultimately one of them ended up dying, and some others injured, one very seriously. And so it was an issue of, we know what the law is. We know that legally he wasn't entitled to use deadly force. But
He would have been entitled to once they were in the house, but once they left,
once they were in the
it
house,
wasn't legal.
but once that incident was over and once he left, he was no longer able to use deadly force. He could have pursued him. He could have called 911. He could have given a license plate number. He could have whatever. He could have involved law enforcement. But he's not entitled. You're not entitled if someone commits a crime against you. You're not entitled a week later to go hunt him down and kill him. I mean, that's not the way our law is. But this was something that we felt like we wanted to take to the people and let them make a decision as to whether or not we charged, and then ultimately what charges were filed.
Okay. And so the then came back, and they charged him with murder, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. It started going to trial, and at some point you guys worked out a deal. What was that deal?
He pled to C felony reckless homicide, and that was a decision that had to be made during trial. We had a lot of people testified in the grand jury that then turned around and refused to testify at trial. Particularly the other individuals that were in the car, and the father of the deceased. Without those types of witnesses, we didn't feel that we would be able to make that higher burden and to be able to show the intent that was necessary. The difference between a murder or voluntary manslaughter and the C felony is basically intent. And we had the burden to show that he intentionally did that. Without those witnesses, we didn't feel that we would be able to do that. Defense counsel came to us with an offer, and we accepted it.
And so as I understand it now, he's pled guilty, and his sentence is going to be up to Judge Kiley?
That's correct.
Okay, 100%. I mean, you guys at this point are just kind of participants, up to the judge.
That's correct. The judge has sole discretion as to the sentencing. So there'll be, probation will do a pre-sentence investigation report, and they'll get that to the judge, and then the judge ultimately will give him a sentence. And the judge can sentence him anywhere in the range. He's been on home detention. He can give him credit for that. He can not give him credit. That's his discretion. And he can suspend the sentence, or he can execute the sentence. A C felony is 2 to 8 years. So that's ultimately going to be up to Judge Kiley what he decides to do with that.
It's interesting. Since you became prosecutor, I think more people follow that Ira Beamer case than any other case. But it just had all the right facts to be really interesting and confusing. Like I said, the law was pretty clear, but then the facts muddied it up.
The facts absolutely muddy it up. I mean, you obviously feel for him and what he went through. when he was robbed at his house. You can put yourself in his shoes. You can, you have all those different things that go on. It would make a great law school question, I guess, for a final exam. But in real life, trying to figure out what to do with that and how to go with that, it's a very difficult problem, especially when you have, well, like I said, people that aren't willing to testify when you actually get to trial.
You know, I'm an outsider looking in, but it seems to me if after that wreck he would have said, hey, I was just trying to follow him, I didn't mean to cause a wreck, I don't think you guys would have had a case, would you? I mean, basically, if he would have kept his mouth shut, there wouldn't have been charges, would there?
I mean, it's hard to assume a bunch of different facts, but certainly that was one thing that I think the grand jury looked at, was the admissions that he made to the officers after he was pulled over.
Because he told one of the officers he was trying to kill him or something to that effect, right?
Exactly.
So that's tough. It seems like whenever I'm looking at the the City County Observer or at any TV station or anything, it's just meth bust after meth bust after meth bust. When I was a prosecutor, you might have 2 or 3 of those per year. Now you guys, it seems like it's just one after another. Mm-hmm. How much has that grown over the last 20 years? Or is that just my imagination? Or?
No, it's certainly grown. We had 115 meth labs in Vanderburgh County last year in 2013, and that was out of around 1,800 in the state. State of Indiana led the country in meth lab seizures, and Vanderburgh County led the state. We started to see an uptick, I want to say it was about 10 years ago or so, when you had to use the anhydrous method. It smelled, you had to be out away from population to be able to get away with that. And I think that we had a population where people go out into the county or go out into other surrounding counties and make it, and then come into Evansville for all the reasons that we come into Evansville, to go to the movies, to go to the mall, to go to the hotels, whatever the reason is, and they would come in, they would sell the meth. That progressed to now we're finding almost exclusively the one-pot method, where you can walk into a CVS or Walgreens or Walmart and you can pick up all the ingredients that you need to make meth, and you can go out to your car and start making it. And so when that method came along, we saw a huge rise here in Vanderburgh County, and I think that's where you started to see a huge uptick. It's not a big problem across the state. It's very regionalized. We have a problem here. Terre Haute doesn't have so much of a problem as much as Illinois does right across the border there. There are basically no meth labs in Marion County. They have heroin, they don't have meth. You can go around the state and you can find these little pockets. It's been a real, I describe it as a cancer, not only in our community but in law enforcement, because it takes so many resources. I mean, if we have 115 meth labs, we're going to obviously file charges in 115 different cases, some of them with multiple co-defendants. We have to then have multiple law enforcement agencies respond. We have to take the labs down. We have to arrest the people. We have to cordon off a neighborhood. We have to do all those types of things. And when you dedicate that many resources to one thing, it obviously takes away from everything else. The other thing that we saw with meth is the smurfing and the need to, it creates other crime. Meth is a drug that you take it the first time and that's the best high you're ever going to have. And then your body adapts to it and you're constantly chasing it. So you may be able to afford a meth addiction for a couple weeks or a couple months. At some point you're going to need so much you can no longer afford it. So you may start stealing, you may start taking money from your relatives, or you may start smurfing. Smurfing is where you go out and get pseudoephedrine for the person that's making it. And so we've kind of seen these crimes kind of come out of it. The state's tried to address it a couple times. The first time they tried to address it, they pulled it back behind the counter and you had to fill out some forms when you bought it and those types of things. And we saw a drop in meth labs for a year or two. And then people realized that that was handwritten, that it was in all these different locations and all the different pharmacies. In order to prosecute someone, in order to make an arrest, you had to send somebody around, drive around, pick up all the logs, sit down, decipher all the handwriting, do all those types of things. So then the next thing the state did was they came back with a system called Implex, and that's a computerized system where all the pharmacies talk together. And that helps because we can print out reports of who's bought too much and who's done this and who's that. And so that helped to a certain degree, and again we saw it dip. Now what we're seeing is the cooks are having people go out, having multiple people and teams go out and get pseudoephedrine and bring it in. And that's as we've started to see this rise again. The answer to cutting down on meth labs is you have to do something with the main ingredient, which is the pseudoephedrine. Some states have made it a prescription only, where you have to go get a prescription before you can get it. I don't think that with the current makeup of our legislature, specifically with there not being a meth problem in Indianapolis or in any of the donut counties around Indianapolis, that we're going to be able to see anything like that. There's two options with regard to that. I think one would be the entire state go to prescription only. The other would be allow the counties to do it and allow it to be county specific. They did that in Missouri. I think we need to take wins where we can get them, and I think a common sense approach at this point would be require everyone to show a driver's license to buy pseudoephedrine and require a prescription for anyone that has a conviction, a prior conviction for meth or precursors or anything like that. So you don't necessarily restrict the law-abiding citizens, but you specifically restrict those that have the convictions and that type of thing. That's a proposal that I think that we could pass and something that I'd like to see our legislature work on.
It makes sense. You know, when we talk to Police Chief Billy Bolin, and when I talk to you now, you're both obviously really, really serious about the meth problem. And sometimes people, they find what they look for. And I wonder if you compare the statistics of Vanderburgh County to other counties, or the state of Indiana to other states, maybe what you find is other ones aren't as aggressive as you guys. Maybe our statistics aren't quite as bad as we might believe, but you guys are working hard and you're ferreting the problem out.
Well,
it's hard to say, you know.
Well, everything's got a silver lining, and that's one that you see the spin that you see a lot of law enforcement, state police, and I'm sure we're guilty of it too. You come out and you say, hey, you know, we have these high numbers because we're out after it, we're out investigating the cases.
It's hard to quantify.
Right. Well, but the problem is that if you were making a difference, the numbers would be going down. We have, like I said, a lot of resources working on this problem, and our numbers stay about the same. What that tells me is that we've hit our capacity. You know, there's more meth labs out there. If you gave us more resources, we could find more.
Really?
But you know, at some point, you're going to see the numbers go down, and that may take a state law change.
So that's really strange, because when I was with the prosecutor's office, they talked about the war on drugs, and you don't hear that expression very much anymore, but it was almost like people had some idea they would really get tough on drugs, put some people in jail, and that'd be the end of it. And I think all that has gone the way of fairy tales or something. Nobody believes that anymore. It's like we're looking at it more as a long-term permanent problem in society we haven't quite figured out to deal with as a criminal matter or as a mental health problem, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've tried different approaches. Judge Trockman's Drug Court obviously is a very good program that helps people get their lives back together. I don't know on the war on drugs. If you go back and look, I think history's going to tell. If you go back and look in the early and late 80s when we started the war on drugs, we started putting money into enforcement. And when we started putting money into enforcement, crime rates went down, murder rates went down, all those types of things went down. Now we've kind of gone over that hill, and we're starting with the treatment. You're seeing money pulled from law enforcement grants and see them put into the drug courts and those types of things. Those are very successful programs. They're good programs, but it's yet to be seen what's going to happen when you start pulling this money for enforcement. For example, in our office a few years ago, we had 3 drug prosecutors that were fully paid by a federal grant. We don't have any now. You know, the federal government revs these programs up, and then they take money away from here and start another program. So that's going to be interesting to see from a historical standpoint of what happens to the crime rate.
Why don't you tell our viewers, what is the drug court? How does that work?
The drug court, we have a couple now in Vanderburgh County. Judge Trockman and Judge Kiley both, they do a drug court and forensic diversion, and that is for adult felons. Judge Niemeyer has a juvenile drug court where he deals with some juveniles, and I think there may be a Chins drug court as well where they deal with some people in Chins. What they do is when you get charged with cases, if you're found to be appropriate, there's a team of people that work on that. We have a representative, there's a public defender on the board, obviously the judge, and then all the different treatment people, basically probation officers and treatment officials. And they get together and decide who they want to take on the program and who would be appropriate. And they work with them through testing, getting them a job, helping them get their lives back straightened out. A lot of times they're having issues getting their kids back. They've been taken away for one reason or another. And they kind of take a holistic approach and try and solve these people's problems as a whole. And depending on what your charges are and which program you're in, you either end up having a very serious crime in which you should go to prison, and you don't end up going to prison, or you have a minor crime in which you don't end up with a conviction. They get dismissed at the end. So it's kind of you get a carrot for going through this program. Now this program is much more strenuous than just being on probation or anything. You may go to court once a week and have to see the judge. You have different meetings, you have different requirements. It's a real privilege to be in the court, but because of that, they're able to get a lot of things done. The limitation with a drug court is it's very time intensive and very resource heavy, and so they're usually at the upper end of how many they can handle. But that's been a really good program for Vanderburgh County for years, and it's also something that's brought in a lot of federal funding. So the county's not out those resources.
The Vanderburgh County also has a veterans court. Is that somewhat similar to a drug court?
It is. It's kind of out of the same vein. They have Judge Kiley started a veterans court a couple years back because veterans have very specific criminal issues. You go and you're in a war environment and you have all these stressors and all these things, and then you come back into civilization and you have trouble sometimes adapting, and that's kind of what that court's set up for. And Vanderburgh County also, I think, is in the process of trying to get a mental health court, trying to deal with some of the mental health issues that people have.
We hear a lot about plea bargains, and obviously most cases don't go to trial. It's a physical impossibility to try all those felonies and all those misdemeanors. What do you look at when you make a plea bargain?
Well, we look at a lot of things, like I said, when we charge. We look at your criminal history. We look at, obviously, the facts of the case. If we have you on video committing a crime, there's a very good chance that defense attorneys can come in and say, hey, my guy wants to plead guilty. Let's figure out some conditions in which he can do that. So it's a bargaining chip. If you go to trial, what you're doing is you're saying, prove it. Let's see what it is what evidence you have, and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So you're requiring all the witnesses to come in. You're doing all those types of things. The majority of our really good cases, obviously the defendant's going to plead. And then we tried, I think last year, we tried 71 jury trials.
That's a lot.
We have quite a few cases going to trial these days. We have a lot of very good young trial attorneys in our office.
Okay. Real quick, we're kind of running out of time, but you just got a really nice national award on the WETIP program. Tell us real quick what that program is.
WETIP is an anonymous line in which you can call and report tips. If you witness a crime, if you're worried about an address that may have some drug activity, if you can call, it's 1-800-78-CRIME. If you can call the WETIP line, they don't take your name, they don't take any information. They just want to know what it is that would help law enforcement in prosecuting a case or in investigating a case. So if you can call and say, here's a license plate number, or I see activity at this house between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. and I think it's drug related, that gives us a way in which we can deploy law enforcement to get out and investigate that and hopefully catch some more people committing crimes.
Just start looking, basically.
Yes.
Right. You were elected in 2010, so you're up for election again this year. It's a 4-year term. You were unopposed in the Republican primary. Right now there's no Democrats that have filed. I mean, are you going to hopefully be unopposed this time, or do you know yet?
We don't know yet. We're obviously ready to run. I enjoy campaigning, enjoy doing that type of thing, but right now we're just in the process of doing our job and doing it well, and we'll let the politics come where they may. So.
Well, if somebody's going to run against you, they're running out of time, so wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Next week we're going to have Andrew McNeil. Mr. McNeil is running in the Republican primary against the current incumbent Larry Bouchon. I hope to see you then. Thank you very much.
This year in the Tri-State, 1 out of 8 people will be in an accident.
Would you know what to do?
Call Woods & Woods. They'll get you help.
When you call Woods & Woods, you are not a statistic. You are our client, and we will fight to get the money you deserve.
And that's what Mike did. He really fought hard for me. They just really cared.
If you've been injured, call 1-800-544-2108.
Let Woods and Woods work for you. You don't owe us a dime unless we win your case.
You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.